In a simple way, Councillor Quacks, that really comes down to an urban greenfield piece of land is simply too big for the model to be able to do it. It's a massive piece of land. The model can deal with sites, but because it hasn't been chopped into sites, it can't really do that.
But nevertheless, we could assume that most of that urban greenfield will be developed, residential.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
pretty
much.
has the
Okay. Yeah. All right, now look, last time we had this conversation was back in August of last year, and then we talked about 880,000 sites being enabled.
Dwellings, yes.
And you also stated there was market feasibility of about 160,000 of those sites, if I recall correctly. But at my insistence, that was peer reviewed, and I understand that the latest peer review, which goes back to October of last year, showed a capacity of only 92,562. Have these numbers now, I know you provided them as evidence to the IHP, but has this number been peer reviewed by the same group that peer reviewed that earlier and came up with a lot less than was presented to us in August of last year?
A number of those members are members of this group again, but the peer review, I believe, was instigated by Mr. Fontaine.
Why not?
Well, there hasn't been enough time to do that. Those members have participated and they've provided us with information to use in this model. But the issues that you raise are something that have come up again as well.
These numbers will be peer reviewed.
If that's what the panel wants, yes.
Well, the panel asked for it to be peer reviewed last time, didn't they?
Yes.
So our expectation would be that these numbers would be peer reviewed again, at the insistence of the panel.
That would be a reasonable assumption, yes.
They would be after accurate information.
Yes.
Yep, okay, thanks. So at this time, we can't take this as being accurate information. Is that right?
I would say it's the best information available, but could it be better? Yes.
Yeah, but you would have said that in August as well.
Oh. Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
How much is this costing?
This is a bit much. I'm endeavouring to be generous and making sure everyone has their questions answered.
Well, Madam Chair, if you recall back in August, when I asked for it to be peer reviewed,
Councillor Quacks,
let me finish.
Councillor
When I asked for it to be
this
peer
is not
reviewed,
doing your
you
cause
would not,
any good.
you would
I'm
not
just
allow me to
making
peer
the
it.
point.
You would say, no,
Councillor-
it's not necessary, Councillor. It's
this
come
is-
out of the machine.
Yeah.
No, all that, and of course you were wrong again.
Please.
Councillor, I don't know what to say. I think the best thing to say is I was actually
would be
trying
best.
to stick up for you, Councillor Quacks. Remind me not to do that again. That was a complete waste of time, wasn't it? Who's next? Any other questions? Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit more about the national policy statement on urban development? Because that sounds very interesting, and I think very encouraging, because urban development has been something that has been an Auckland thing. The rest of the country has been neglected, and there would hardly be a country in the world where just about all the focus on urban development and growth is on one city. And it's not helpful for the country as a whole. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the National Policy Statement is being put together by Ministry for the Environment and MB. They have started the initial consultation now. The focus is very much on capacity. Have you got enough land supply is kind of fundamentally the question. Obviously the stuff that Kyle has talked about is a technique for measuring that. Whether or not that's adequate is a different question. The intention is National Policy Statement, something to comment on, will be coming out later in April this year, with a view to it being implemented in October-ish.
So is it to ensure that that urban New Zealand, the cities of New Zealand, the towns of New Zealand have adequate land supplies, that's what it's about?
Basically, yeah.
Okay, well that's, some have got plenty.
Councillor Cashmore.
Well, thanks, Madam Chair. It's fascinating stuff, guys. I get any great degree of accuracy is probably really, really challenging. So you are saying this is what we've learnt from past experience, and we massage it with a new context. One of the single question I have is when you talk about sort of what price and what price range, are you using population growth and migration to inform that, or are you using a status quo? How does that factor in, like demand versus actual physical costs?
Yeah, so I guess it's semi-related to Councillor Quacks's question before. Could you bring up the presentation, please? Basically, the model is buying sites at its valuation in 2014, which is some time ago, obviously, and selling them for prices that we expect to get for dwellings in that location at the moment. I guess your question is if all of those dwellings materialise overnight, would those prices be still viable? The answer is clearly no, and that's why I think we need to be really careful about looking at this information as a starting point for a forecast that takes that kind of information into account. So the observed prices, I guess, are set as an implicit supply-demand for another dwelling of that type in that location. And I guess the economic forecast needs to take account of those mixes and matches. I guess we have an overarching identified need for 400,000 dwellings, and so I guess the working assumption is that whatever we provide is probably going to be consumed at the current rate of building anyway. But this model doesn't go there. It's saying if a developer could look at every single site in the region, or almost every single site in the region at one time, and say which ones would I like to buy if they were for sale, this is what that model does.
Yep. So the reality of actual demand-driven pricing is a whole different ballgame again.
Yes, sir. So if we had a shortage or ongoing shortage, then prices would continue to rise, and so prices might be a bit low. If we were able to meet our housing challenge, then prices might be a bit less. But that's not in this particular model.
The main requirement is we have to enable build.
That's right, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. Any other questions?
Well, I've got a question.
Yes, Councillor Wood.
Yeah, thank you. In there's some evidence that Dr. Fairgrave put in. He seemed to say that there was a lot more development potential. If I recall what he had in his evidence, which only went in a few weeks ago. What's the correlation between what you've got here and what Dr. Fairgrave's come up with?
So basically Dr. Fairgrave starts with this information as the starting point for his forecast, and he has made an assumption around how prices may change over time in the future using long run averages. And just as the change in the difference between the purchase price 18 months ago and its sale price today is a function of quite rapid price inflation, which means that there's a lot of numbers falling out the end of the model. He does moderate for that, but that short term just plays out over a longer time period. So as buildings depreciate, new sites might be available for development. So I'm very, very summarising his evidence, and I'm a bit nervous about speaking on his behalf. But basically, his assessment is that over time, it looks like at least out to 2026, which is 10 years from today, as a useful time horizon for thinking about how long this planning system might be around. It does appear that there will be enough in terms of overall numbers, but after that date it gets tighter. But there is a question about the affordability, particularly at the lower end, and about the location of where those dwellings are.
But doesn't he say for the 2040, going out from 2026 2040, that there could be sufficient?
Under certain circumstances, I believe that's what he said, yes.
that his decisions were made without any out-of-scope upzoning.
That's right. So starting with the information from this model, which only includes the as notified zoning pattern with the changes or relaxation that was made to the residential rules.
Councillor Wood? Councillor Cooper?
Chair, just talking about 10-year timeframes, is that, I mean, that seems pretty short-sighted when we have a 30-year infrastructure plan and you know, we're operating in much longer timeframes. Is that, for me, it's rather a short-sighted kind of view. So we're really looking, that's one person's piece of evidence that said fine for 10 years maybe. And given what you've said before is there's a lot of variables, you've got your model and it's really, really technical and I'm get a bit lost, I must say, but I trust your expertise in this area because I'm not a geographer. But if we're going to rely on one person's piece of evidence to back up what some people think, is that a prudent way to look when we're looking in a 30-year time frame for infrastructure? Should we not be looking further than that?
Can I answer that?
Thank you.
We have to be a little bit careful. Kyle is presenting evidence to the panel.
So I'll ask you then,
Yep.
Shark.
I think that's probably not a question we should be answering. The model does certain things, and there's a limit to what the model does and
Yes,
doesn't do. It
absolutely.
is simply an input.
Yeah, it's a
and
tool.
I think that is something that we really need to keep in mind.
Yeah.
It is not an absolute, it is not a pure science, and it is simply an input. There are lots of other things that when one thinks about this, you then have to take into account. That may very well be one of them,
Yeah.
should you be thinking that short term, but probably not appropriate for us to go there.
That was my point, Madam Chair, that, you know, if we're picking out little bits to suit, we've got to look at a bigger picture. That's what we're here for. And I suppose I'm trying to tease out in terms of, we've got that model, but there's so many variables. You can't pin people down to the last little nth degree because you just never know what's going to happen. You know, people didn't think there was going to be a global financial crisis. They didn't think there was going to be an earthquake. But stuff happens in the world and all of that can go out the window. So I think we just have to do the best we can with what we've got in terms of, and we can't be picking everything to pieces and peer reviewing every little bit of stuff that our staff spend a massive amount of time working on, and then we have even more costs to peer review everything.
Probably just on that, just because of what you said again, we just have to be careful. So it wasn't just the staff doing it. There was a group of people.
Yes, I understand there was a working group with a lot of different
together.
inputs. I'm talking
Yeah.
about models and things like that, but we can't, you know, there's a lot of input and we have to take all of it into account.
Yeah, I guess in my mind this model certainly gives us a good idea about if this is the planning system that we end up with, what will happen in the very short term. I guess if you have you have a vision that ultimately in the longer term the city will be quite different from what you've allowed to happen in the first step, that gives you an idea about what you need to change for your second step,
Exactly.
arguably.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, that might be a very good point to move on. And just remembering, as Mrs. Pruitt kept saying right from the beginning of this process, this wasn't about how many people we could shove into Auckland. This was making sure that spatially we designed the best city that it could possibly be, with the best infrastructure in the right place and people and jobs close to each other. So, you know, whilst this is critical, it's not the only bit of evidence on which the unitary plan's based. So thank you. I just want to acknowledge the team again for this extraordinary piece of work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.